is where the water main is below the street, how the water main has a line that goes directly to the property, passes through the foundation. The piping then goes across to where there should always be a valve before the meter and then one after the meter. And it shows how this actually happens on an artist rendering. It also shows if the property was perhaps a maybe a slab construction, not a basement. Many of the homes in the Philadelphia area are basements, but there are quite a few slab constructions. How it would go under the foundation, the piping, from the water main in the street, and then up through the foundation, and again, a valve before the meter and then a valve after the meter. It's important to make sure homeowners know where the shutoff valves are for the house, the main water shutoffs. Strange things happen. And if there should be a rupture in a line, it's important that your buyers know where their main shutoff is and the ability to be able to do that, which is not difficult. It is a typical either screw-on type of or a left to right type of valve to close off. It goes on page 39 to talk about wells. You're not going to find really a well in Philadelphia, but if you're accidentally got lost and you are representing a buyer and or seller in the suburbs, there very well could be a well. So with that said, it talks about how the well tank works with a bladder system. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's a rare occurrence that you're going to be dealing with it. But if a property has a well, you would have a special water inspection done that tests for either, or both, I should say, the potability and the availability of the water coming through. Make sure the bacterial level is correct and that the sufficient amount of water is coming in from the well. On page 42, on the bottom right, we're going to talk about, it has an artist rendering of a hot water system, or I should say a hot water heater or water heater, of which they've like sliced it, and it's showing this to be a gas system. If you look at the artist rendering to the left side of the water heater, there is a cast iron black gas pipe. And we had talked about this gas piping when we spoke last week in regards to the hot air, gas hot air system for heat. This is how the energy, the source of energy to cause the fire, the flame to happen, how it makes itself available and into the system. So on the artist rendering, it shows the pipe coming down, it shows a gas shutoff, and then it makes a 90-degree turn into the system. Now, you'll note, as it did on the gas-fired hot air system, there is an extension pipe below the 90-degree turn. That's there for a very particular reason. As I spoke about last week, if there is moisture in the gas coming into the property, when the gas makes the 90-degree turn to go into the system, either the hot water system, the water system, and or the heating system, if there is moisture, it's going to drop below that 90-degree turn. It's important that that piece of extension pipe is there. And as we spoke about last week, when that piece of extension pipe is not there, that is a clue to you that this property has had work done to it by a non-professional. A non-professional, Uncle Joe, we like to call him Uncle Joe, replaced this water heater, but did not see the need for the extension pipe is just a little bit of a telltale sign not done by a professional plumber. A professional plumber would always have that extension pipe because that's how we do this correctly. So a little thing to note. So when the water heater is on demand, so you're upstairs, you turn on the water for a bath for your son, your daughter, and you get up there and now you're running the water. Now a bath uses a good bit of hot water, like a washing machine, like a dishwasher, right? So there is a certain amount of water in this tank that has been just sitting there, stewing quietly, keeping hot, and then on demand, it releases and goes wherever it needs to go. Well, right now, the demand is for the bathtub, and this hot water in the tank is now traveling up to the second floor to the bathtub. But you have used a particular amount of water in that tank, of which at a particular place, the tank realizes it's still asking for demanding of water. So now I got to heat more water. In doing so, that is when the burner on the bottom, you'll see there, ignites. That's that sound when you've been in your laundry room or mechanical room in the home and you hear that woof sound, both from a hot air heating system and or your water heater, is the flame igniting to heat the water in this situation, to boil this water, to heat it up. So it is a continuous available amount of water for the need. So that's when the burner is going to kick on. Now it can kick on because the gas is the ignition. That is the fuel to ignite the flame. And so when a particular place in this water heater, it indicates it needs more hot water, the gas is released to go across the burner and ignite. It then heats the water in the tank. Two things you need to note, three things. On the right-hand side of the illustration, on page 42 on the bottom right, is at the top where it says shut-off valve. This is where the cold water supply feeds into the tank. Cold water goes into the tank and the tank then heats the water. So as the water pressure drops in the tank, not only does the burner ignite to heat water, it's also bringing in additional water to be able to be heated, right? On the far right, you'll see what is called a temperature and pressure relief valve. This is a huge piece of equipment. More times than not, depending on the manufacturer style, the temperature pressure relief valve is on the side of the tank and it is a brass fitting, of which there should be an extension pipe, as you see in the illustration, down to within 6 inches of the floor. This is a safety precaution. The whole brass hookup is a safety precaution. One, that if the thermostat in the water tank malfunctions and the tank doesn't realize it's reached its predetermined temperature that has been determined by the homeowner prior, and it defaults and it just keeps cooking and cooking and cooking. State Farm has a commercial that I haven't seen it in a while, but the commercial shows a cute little Cape Cod and the camera is across the street. And all of a sudden, from the Cape Cod's A-frame roof, a water heater jets up and through the roof. And people go, oh, wow, look at that. Well, guess what? That's about as true as it can possibly get. The purpose of the temperature pressure relief valve is to relieve the pressure if the thermostat malfunctions. It is true. A water heater can be as a rocket up to 2 stories in the air. That is not just for advertisement. That is a real functional problem that can happen. So the temperature pressure relief valve Once the pressure within the tank reaches at or beyond its potential level, will discharge, and it will discharge this boiling hot water out. Now, the issue is, most tanks are probably 5 foot high or so, and the temperature pressure relief valve is probably 4.5 feet high from the bottom of the tank. If that randomly discharges due to a deficiency of the tank, and someone is walking by, scalding water is going to discharge onto someone. Now, for an adult, it may hit them in the abdomen, depending on the height of the person, probably not the abdomen, the chest, and or above the chest to the neck. But if a child just so happened to be walking by, it would get them in the face. Horrible situation. So, a temperature pressure relief valve always needs the extension pipe screwed into it so that when it does discharge, it discharges down the pipe to within 6 inches of the floor, therefore only feet can get burned. See the concept here? Now, in an FHA VA transaction, it is mandated that a temperature pressure relief valve beyond extension pipe, beyond the water heater. On conventional, it is not mandatory, but it is strongly suggested. So for those of you who are walking through a property before you list it, you see there is no extension pipe, inform your seller that that needs to be added as a safety precaution, because it is going to show up on as a request for the home inspection report, okay? So it's extremely important that that temperature pressure relief valve have an extension pipe. The pipe does not have to be copper. It can be PVC, due to the fact that the brass fitting that is attached to the water heater has threads on the inside of the pipe. That is known as a female fitting. What you're going to tell your sellers to do is to get a male fitting, and it can be PVC. A male fitting has threads on the outside of the extension. So the PVC can be screwed into the brass fitting and meets all the requirements needed to protect. When we move on, excuse me, to page 43, you'll see at the top it has a scalding water chart for temperatures, and at what temperature, how long does it take to cause any damage. So here on this chart, it shows that 120 degrees is what they consider hot, and it would take 5 minutes of exposure to cause damage to the skin. This chart shows a range from 120 down to 160, which they consider very hot water. People with small children have to be very careful of where this temperature is, and it is always adjustable on the exterior of a gas system to be adjusted up or down. So anyone with children has to be very cautious of where they have their temperature. Those who have no small children may make a decision to raise the temperature to 140 or maybe even 150 degrees for the hot water use in laundry and or a dishwasher. But it is a basic kind of charting system to give you an idea. Just below that, on page 43, is an artist rendering of a slicing of an electric water heater. Now, you'll find electric water heaters, obviously, in all electric homes. Many condominiums are all electric. Therefore, the water heater, too, is electric. The basic concept of the system remains the same as it does for gas, but you'll note that the heating element is way higher in the tank in comparison to gas, where it was at the base of the tank. To adjust the thermostat in the heating systems, there may be one or two, and of which are behind a plate. So you have to unscrew the plate on the outside of the water heater removed it, and then go in and adjust the water temperature. Replace the plate. It too has a shutoff valve for the interior flow of water. And you need a shutoff valve. If the water heater is deficient over age and develops leaking, it leaks at the bottom. So if you go into your laundry room and it's wet, the floor, like, oh my God, run over and shut the water from going into the tank. Because what's happening, if there's a leak at the base of the tank, the water's going in the tank and going out the hole and on your floor, right? So you're going to want to shut that off so no more water is going into your tank. It too has a temperature pressure relief valve with the same setup and the same purpose of a gas heated system. Okay? Any questions on that? All right, good. Let's go and look at, well, on page 44, it goes into greater detail on the left-hand side in regards to the temperature pressure relief valve, but we talked pretty extensively on that. It does have an illustration on 44 of a water heater fueled by oil. They're there, they function. You rarely ever see one, but you just need to know it is a possibility to have an oil-fired water heater. If you look on page 45, they've done an artist rendering on a couple things. And one is in regards to a basement home at the top and how the water heater responds when it's demanding water throughout the property. So it shows how the hot water comes up the piping and then will go to wherever it's asked to go. So the piping is designed then to go up through the flooring of the second floor to go, which is the cold system, because your toilet always has cold water in it. If you're sitting on a toilet that feels awful warm and fuzzy, somebody goofed. Okay, so the cold water goes up, and it also continues across the ceiling of the basement and the flooring of the second floor, the both hot and cold, respectively. Because at a kitchen sink, or bathroom sink in this illustration, you will be asking for both cold and hot at any given time. So two lines have to come up from the system to supply that. Notice in the artist rendering, under the sink and the vanity, they have two shutoff valves. Shutoff valves are needed in case something should spontaneously leak. It's an immediate shutoff at the area of deficiency. Philadelphia has a lot of old property. Not uncommon to not find shutoff valves under sinks, such as bathroom vanity sinks, kitchen sinks, utility sinks. So if someone's purchasing an older property, as they update, they will be having and adding shutoff valves for each of the sources where water comes out of. The illustration shows below of a crawl space. So let's pretend we have a rancher and it's got a crawl space. The hot water system, you'll notice, is much smaller in height. It's squatty, but everything functions the same way. So it's shorter in height. It has an extension valve attached, and it shows how the system works the same from the ceiling of the basement, or ceiling from the first floor, I should say. It shoots up and supplies cold water to the toilet. And then there is both cold water and hot water supplied to the vanity in the bathroom. It also shows on the next page how this would work if it was a slab construction. Okay, so the water system, the water heating would be in a separate location. And so cold water has to go in to feed the tank, and hot water has to come out of the tank and then runs along the slab foundation to supply where it is needed. Okay? Just below that, it talks about metal distribution piping. Lead was found in the 1900s. It was soft, it's of gray color. It performed by bends. They were soft bends that the copper would take to have water flow through it. Then we moved up in the 20s to galvanized steel, which is customarily black, and it has threadings. You'll note it shows the threadings and that vertical pipe being threaded into that bending joint known as an elbow is a male fitting. See how you see the threads on the outside? That is threading into threads in the joint that are on the inside. That's a female part there at the joint. Okay? Then in the 50s, we went to copper. Copper is brown, yet when there is corrosion and it is exposed to water, it turns gray due to the mineral changes. Copper is pretty expensive. The concept of copper was similar to that of galvanized, except there was no threading. You would have to solder it closed, heat it, and with a solder, close the element, right? It speaks about, on 46, plastic distribution piping. This is what we call PVC. You will see some of that bringing water occasionally up to vanities and such, but the greatest place you're going to find PVC piping, both in white and in black, is in the sewer system. When all that water is leaving the house, it has been replaced with generally the PVC plastic. And the most modern type of distribution of water is known as PEX. And that is done, in my eyes, I see that system like a spinal cord. You'll see here on the left-hand side, they have a solid gray area. One to the right of that solid gray area, which for me is the spinal cord, you'll see all of these compression fittings coming out in the color of blue, blue for cold. Yet on the left side of that spinal cord, all of this piping, which is plastic and flexible, is going to be red. And so that is the distribution of the hot water. It's all supplied from the base, again, coming from your water heater. This is what we see in new construction today. Generally works pretty well. On a rare occasion, there will be a puncture made to that up in the walls, which can happen. And then we've got water in the walls, and we have to figure out how to shut all that out and find out where that's coming from. But most of the time it works really well. On page 47, it talks about water softeners. Don't have to dwell on this. Water softeners are used when there is well water. And so we so seldom get involved with well water, we're not going to dwell too much on that. It goes on about iron removing system. Again, that would be with a well. So we're not going to worry too much about that. On the bottom of page 49, it's going to talk about garbage disposals. So I would guess that many of you grew up with garbage disposals, but not everyone. Turn to page 50, and there's a couple points that we need to bring out here. It shows a basic format of how a garbage disposal works. On the upper left, you'll see that the disposal is adhered to the base of the sink. The disposal is a motor. Now, they come in various horsepowers, as small as 1/4 of a horse. You can chew up better than that can. So it averages, from my understanding, from 1/4 to 1/3 to 1/2 to 3/4 and a full horsepower. Clearly, the greater the horsepower, the greater the grinding process, the more it can handle. It's not a big differential in pricing to go from a half a horse to a full horse, minimum of a 3/4. If you own investment properties, spend the extra $50, $75 and get yourself a full horse garbage disposal. Get it for yourself too. Tenants, God only knows what they put down there. And you need something that's not clogging up and breaking every 6 months. So spend the extra money now and put a good system in. You can see the U-trap is after the garbage disposal. And we're going to be talking more about that trap. It's called a U as in the letter U, trap. This one on the artist rendering is showing a switch on the wall that controls the on-off of the garbage disposal. Clearly, there are safety issues to consider, right? Got to make sure that we don't have spoons and forks going down there. We're not going to put bones down there. But what a lot of people don't realize is when you are working a garbage disposal, you must use water that aids in the grinding up and pushing the water through and out to the sewer line. What people don't know is the running of the water needs to be cold water, not hot water. The reason for the cold water is because this is a motor, right? And it's working really hard. The cold water running through the system helps to aid and keep the little motor itself from overheating. So it's important to use cold water when you're doing this. You'll note on the other illustration to the right of that, it talks about a reset. So those of you who have worked with garbage disposals, sometimes you know something will catch underneath the blade. And you go to flip it on and you hear, and you're like, oh God, okay. Something has caught underneath the blade. Sometimes it's a penny. Sometimes it's a screw because you had a guy in there fiddling with the light or something, right? Directly underneath the base of the garbage disposal, if you put your hand under the sink, you will feel a small little hole, probably the circumference that of a pencil. That is when a very special tool is needed. On the next page, on page 51, you'll see it's called a service wrench. It's very similar to that of an Allen wrench. You insert it into the hole and you gently turn to the left. You're meeting resistance. And then you're going to gently turn to the right and you're going to be meeting resistance. Because what you're doing is you're manually turning the blades. And as you go from left to right, whatever is caught, my lips to God's ear, dislodges. And when it dislodges, you don't have resistance. You can twirl that thing around. Now, you have to put your hand in there to get it out. That's a big safety concern. So you want to make sure no one's around you because the only way you're going to get this to turn on is somebody's got to flip that switch. So unfortunately, you have to somehow either with a tweezers, a long tweezers, like medical tweezers, or something you have, or you got to put your hand down there and remove that piece of whatever was jamming in there. If you don't, it's just going to jam up again, right? Safety, safety, safety. There are garbage disposals that do not work on a switch. The switch is often on the wall by the sink and or under the cabinet, the kitchen cabinet. There's also a type where it's a manual insertion to the opening in the sink, and you have to twist it a certain way to ignite it to turn on, to the power to happen, so it turns itself on. I have seen them in use. Excuse me. I have never used them, but that is another really good safety type of feature that you may see in some properties. Look where it says hose bib. This is really important to understand, but it's also a really good reason to be calling your clients in October. October, everything's shutting down, right? We're pulling out our garden. We're cutting down our flowers from the summer. Everything's coming to an end. The use of the hose is very limited at this point. This is the time you want to educate your clients and remind them in October they have to drain their hose bib. You're like, okay, so what's that mean? All right, this is what it means. In the basement, you need to put yourself in approximate where you know the hose bib is outside, where you've always hooked up your hose to. So you're like, it should be right about here, you say to yourself in the basement. Now look up, and you're going to see a water line just about where you think it should be that's going right through the foundational wall. Bada bing, bada boom, you found it. Now I want you to trace backwards, and all of a sudden you're going to see a shutoff valve. That is the valve that is allowing water to go through the pipe when needed to the hose bib. You're going to shut the valve off in the basement, and then you're going to leave and you're going to go outside, and now you're going to turn your hose on. The water that was from where the hose, where the water line was shut off in the basement from that shutoff switch, out the outside, all of that water is then removed.
You going?
Okay? Shut your speakers off, guys. So that's when all the water is removed from the line. Because there is no water in the line, your hose line will not freeze. That is a big problem, and everybody kind of realizes that the end of March, when all of a sudden we have water, A, in a basement, B, water cascading from the outside of this hose bib. That hose bib was not drained and therefore froze over the winter. This is a great opportunity to be able to speak to your clients, keeping in touch with your clients, but have something of real value to pass on to remind them to drain their hose bibs. Okay, make sense? All right, let's look on page 52. We're going to talk about modern water hammer arresters. Can't say that fast, that's for sure. Okay, those of you who grew up in a home that had hot water heat, such as a radiator and or baseboard hot water heat, but pretty much radiators is where this falls into play. Remember hearing some banging in the walls? You're at grandma's and you're like, what is that sound, for crying out loud? What that sound is actually air trapped in the water line. These air chambers allow air, whenever getting in the system, to escape. By escaping, it avoids the banging sound of the piping when there's water caught in the line. So that's what all that is about. When you look on page 53, it talks about venting, drain, waste, and vent systems. Okay. Air plays a big part in the functioning of our plumbing system. Those of you who may have been raised in the burbs or familiar with single-family homes, when you can see the A-line roof or angled roofings, you oftentimes will see PVC piping, I don't know, 12 inches tall, coming out of these roofs. And you're like, what are those pipes for? Actually, they're there to release sewer gases. It is also important that air can enter the system. Now, when you look at this artist rendering on 53, we see the pipe at the bottom coming from underground. And then there is a clean out valve that makes it accessible if something should be trapped in this line. What are we going to do? Dig up the whole thing? God forbid, right? So they made it accessible so that the plumber comes down with an instrument known as a snake, which is a wiry piece that they feed in there trying to break up wherever that obstruction is. But on the same token, sewer gases have to be released, and they are released above the roof line. And so that's where those pipes come into play. Good illustration here on 53, air admissions valve. See where it says water trapped sewer gases? All right, so you see the slice of a sink, piping comes down, and then you have that U-trapped. I said we were going to talk about that. And notice the artist put some water in there. The purpose of a U-trap is to prevent the sewer gases to back up and enter the house. It can't back up and enter the house because it's going to hit water in the U-trap. So let's pretend you guys are showing properties to investors, or it's a property that's been on the market a long time. It's not, no one's living in it, so it's a vacant property. And so toilets aren't being flushed, the sinks aren't being turned on. And we're dealing with, especially in the summertime, humidity and heat. Heat will cause the water in that U-trap that is not being replaced on a regular basis to evaporate. Now, if there is no water in that U-trap, sewer gases will now have a means to enter into the property. You open the door of a grandmom house that's been vacant for 6 months, and you walk in and you go, ooh, smells like caca. Ooh. First sign for you to understand are a couple things. There is a lot in observing a property. We use our eyes, we use our nose, we use our ears, we use a lot of senses, touch. So in doing this, if your nose is telling you something doesn't smell right, something's wrong. So now we have to determine, what is it? Is it that sewer gases are making their way past all of these U-traps because there has not been functioned in a long time and the water has evaporated? Is it because as you guys head down the basement, the stench is greater? And is it possible a cracked sewer line that has caused the smell? Things like this. It's important to use all of your factors when you're in a home, okay? Because they all have a purpose. All right, so that's a good illustration there on page 53. Again, another really good illustration is on page 54 when it talks about a floor drain trap. Concepts are all the same, right? It's that U shape of the piping. So when there is no water or limited water, to prevent the sewer gases, they're going to come up either through the floor, because that's where the floor drain trap is, through the vanity, through the kitchen sink, through the utility sink. These are all places where all this shenanigans can happen, right? You'll also notice on 54 where there could be sewer cleanouts. So we talked about it earlier, the floor one, we had an illustration, but it also could be on a 45-degree angle vertically, where the plumber would come in and put the snake to dislodge or break up any type of obstruction in the sewer line. Now, I'm going to share something with you guys. Unfortunately, probably greater than 50%, and that's pretty high, right? If you are the buyer's agent and your buyer is purchasing a rehab This too can happen with new construction, but much more frequently it happens with rehabs. You'll settle, you've had a home inspection, life is wonderful. 3 days later, you get a panic phone call from your buyer. That water is backing up everywhere. The utility sink, the kitchen sink, I don't know what's going on, the floor drain, there is water everywhere. Everybody's in a panic, right? Here's what happens. Unfortunately, contractors use the sinks for their cleaning. Spackle is one of the biggest problems. Spackle, as we all know, gets hard, right? Starts soft and then gets hard. And they will clean their tools in the kitchen sink, in the vanity. And as the spackle washes through and does make it out to the sewer in the street, there is a lot of residue that remains. And if it's a long weekend, or it's a contractor who is working on a couple jobs at a time and not consistently at that property, whatever residue of spackle there may be is now going to harden in that sink. And the water, he comes back a week later and does some more spackling and cleaning and painting and cleaning and whatever. And a little bit more will end up in that buildup at the bottom. You sell the house. Home inspector comes through. He ran the dishwasher. He ran the shower. You know, not a lot of water at any particular time. A home inspector can never duplicate what the life is in living in a home, right? So within 3 days, we've taken a lot of showers. And we ran the dishwasher. And we filled up the utility sink to do something with. And we did this and that, right? Okay. If you are the buyer's agent for definitely a rehab, encourage a couple things. One is, I would strongly encourage your buyer to spend the extra $200, $250 and have that sewer line scoped. Reason being, if the sewer line is scoped, you're going to identify if there is any buildup or a blockage starting in the sewer line. Or maybe, and probably is, a very old sewer line, and you will be identifying if there are any cracks in the sewer line. You want to do all this prior to the buyer owning the property. If my lips to God's ear, everything is clean and working wonderful, mazel tov. If it's not, then that's going to be part of your reply to home inspection. The replacing of a sewer line can be very costly. So let's determine ahead of time if we have an issue or not. If you can't convince your buyer to do that, strongly recommend there are some homeowner companies, State Farm, Travelers, Erie, whoever they use. There are some of them that include replacing sewer lines in their monthly charge. There's also, through the water company, an option to obtain coverage at a very low cost, something like $8 a month or something, to add as an insurance policy to the homeowner coverage for sewer lines. We're an old city. We've got old stuff underground. That small little $8, $10 a month can make a huge difference when they're digging up streets and digging up the front of the house. Okay, so things to think about. These buyers many times are first-time home buyers. They don't know. They're relying on you and your expertise. This is wonderful information for yourself, God forbid. So educate your buyers in regards to protecting that sewer line, however they choose to do it, okay? It also talks about on page 55. Now we're going to talk about septic systems. It does talk about public sewer systems on the left-hand side. Now we have a sliced illustration here, and you'll see on the left-hand side it shows the street, of which there's a basin at the curb. And the basin at the curb goes to the storm sewer. So that's the water that runs down the curb, excuse me, when it rains, right? And you'll note as you go across where it says storm sewer, it goes up to the house and it hooks to where your downspout is. Oh, so all of the water coming down the roof goes in the gutter. From the gutter goes down the downspout, goes into the sewer underground, and follows into the storm sewer catch-all. You'll note that is quite different from the one below that says sanitary sewer. This is where our brown water goes. Flushing of the toilet, the discharge from the washing machine, the shower, the kitchen sink. This is where all that water comes down. And you'll see, as you follow the piping underground, it shows it goes to the vanities, it can go to the toilet. That's where all this is going, right? Now, it shows a sump pump. That's a whole separate animal. See that the sump pump has no piping going into it? There's no source feeding the sump pump because the sump pump is fed in a pit from subterranean water going in the system. When that pump fills up the crock, it discharges. And when it discharges, it takes the water up and out of the house and so many feet away from the walls and foundations of the property. In Philadelphia County only, the sump pump may discharge into the utility sink. So what does that mean? That means when a sump pump discharges in Philadelphia, it discharges into the utility sink. Well, the utility sink is part of the sanitation sewage, and that's where that additional water will go. In the suburbs, they can't handle that. So when a sump pump discharges, it always is expelled outside of the house, far enough away from the house so that that water doesn't re-enter the foundation of the house, okay? Sump pumps are not a bad thing. When you show a property that has a sump pump, you need to educate your buyers that this isn't a bad thing. That means this house has a high water table, the ground has a lot of water in it, but someone else has taken the expense and cost to correct the problem. So it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing, okay? All right, when we look at septic systems on the top right of 55, let's see how this is working. All right, so we have the toilet on the right-hand side. We flush the toilet. Water races down, leaves the house, and enters into the septic tank. Clearly, the septic tank is underground, away from the house. Now, the solid material from the toilets, from showers, from dishwasher, all of this is going into the septic system. It's all where it's going, right? The solid waste will settle to the bottom, gravity, right? And the dirty brown water will come to the top. At some point, that tank is going to fill up. And it's going to fill up because the waste at the bottom has accumulated to a level that is forcing the water line up. Once the water line has reached an escape place, it will then discharge. And where it says fields, that is what is called a leaching field. And you see it in the illustration just below that. You see the sludge is at the bottom. There is the brown water and scum, of which it reaches a particular level, discharges through the outlet into piping, which is sort of like PVC piping with holes in it. And the brown water then discharges to the grass or soil area. The soil will absorb this water. So this is where, if you've ever been in a property who has a septic system with a leaching fields attached, that's where the grass grows always the greenest. Okay? And that's a ha-ha in case you don't know that. All right. That gives you some ideas how this works. Now, let's turn to page 56. 56 is going to illustrate where those of you who are, excuse me, familiar or who have property in the Poconos, have family who have property in the Poconos, maybe you vacation in the Poconos. Many properties in the Poconos deal with what is called mound septic, also known as sand mound. The concept leaving the house is the same. It goes into a septic tank, but instead of going into immediately a leaching field, it then discharges to a pump system and a crock, of which, when it reaches a particular water height, is pumped. There's a little motor. It pumps the brown water up the mound. The mound generally is full of gravel and or sand, and it pumps the brown water up to the top of the mound, and through gravity, the water cleanses itself by passing through the gravel and the sand, and then is absorbed, excuse me, absorbed into the soil. If these properties, or let me correct that, when these properties have sand mound in the rear, they oftentimes don't have public water. They will then have well water. Clearly, let's think about this. At some point, that brown water has reached the top of the mound and through gravity and absorption has worked its way down. I really don't want my well anywhere near that. Your well will be found almost always in the front of the property. Great distance between the two, right? But this is why well water always has to be examined to make sure that the bacteria level is not elevated, that there is no bacteria in that water, okay? So it's very important. Don't let some buyer talk you out of, I don't want to spend it. No, the answer is yes, you are going to do this. It also shows here a sewage injection pipe. These are for properties that have brown water sort of subterraneally. And it's below where it says the house drain. So water runs downhill, it doesn't run uphill. To get it to function, to work uphill, we have to attach a pipe and an injector. So that ejector pipe is sending the brown water up and out through the systems. Many of the rehabs and or newer constructions, those who have subterranean bedrooms that have those very large windows that look like mini sliders with the second means of egress in those window wells shaped like a D that people can climb out, those bathrooms often are below the sewer line. Therefore, those toilets and sinks and such will have an injector system hooked to it. So it's a motor that is going to force that brown water up and out to where it needs to go, to the sewer line, to the street. Okay? Make sense? All right. Let's look at 57 on the bottom right. The bottom right of page 57 gives you a picture of what a gas meter looks like. Believe it or not, there are agents, when reminded, new agents doing their walkthrough, an agent for the buyer is responsible in the city of Philadelphia to obtain a meter reading for both gas and water. And you may say, well, why is that? Well, gas and water are lienable mechanical owned by the city. If there is an outstanding balance on these systems, they are the responsibility of the seller. So the title company does a search both for gas and water to confirm there is or is not rears owed on these municipal services. When you walk through the morning of, the night before a property, you get these meter readings. Those meter readings need to be given to the title company. Now, we are 2020. Most people have some type of an iPhone, Android, whatever. Most agents today will take a photograph of the water meter and the gas meter. Now, I want you to look at the illustration. It's sort of an oblong, gray in color metal, probably 14, 15 inches tall by 9, 10 inches wide. At the upper part, there is a digital meter, and there are 4 or 5 numbers, I can't recall. That is where you want to take your camera and click and take a picture of that. For water meters, I'll show you where it is. So let's back up here. And on the artist rendering, he shows it. And that was meter. I see a meter there. Meters. I think I have to back myself up here. I do. Hang on a sec. I'm going to find a decent picture. So, got it. Look on page 38, beginning of chapter 5. On page 38, on the left-hand side, where there's a circle around where it says valve, meter, valve, look just above that in the horizontal position, because generally in the city, that's how you're going to find this, horizontally. See where it points to the meter? At the top of the meter, which is black, there is a lid. You have to open the lid. When you open the lid, you will see a series of numbers. Okay? That is the photo you want to get for the water meter reading. Those 2 photos, excuse me, have to go to the title company. And you're like, okay, well, why do they got to go to the title company? Because the title company had gotten a meter reading from both of them from the municipality itself, from the city, determining where the last reading was and what it should read. If there is a huge discrepancy between what the title company has received and what you're giving them, there's a problem somewhere. Something went awry. Is there a leak somewhere? And that's when we have to figure out what the heck's going on. Okay? The title company will make the adjustment needed if there is a small adjustment that has to be made, and that'll be on your Alta or your HUD-1 for adjustments. Remember, at the settlement table, the lienable items, both gas and electric, will be satisfied. It's even Steven when we leave. If the seller had paid and is owed money back from either gas or water, depending on when it was read and when it's due and when we're closing, this is all way above a realtor's pay grade. This is all done by title companies. There will be a credit given to the buyer. Seller paid up to and through X, but the buyer is buying at Y. So there is still money that's been paid by the seller to a further date. That difference will be credited on the sheet to the buyer. Why? Because the next water bill belongs to that buyer. The water company is notified from the title company that the property has changed hands. That is not something the new owner has to do. They have to call gas, and they have to call electric, and they have to call cable, and they do all that. Not water. Water is handled by the title company. With that said, you need to remind your buyers that the next water bill coming in is theirs, even though it will more than likely, for the next 2 months, have the seller's name on it. It takes usually 2 cycles, water cycles, for the water company to update the ownership name. Even though the name comes in the seller, it is your water bill, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. So it's important that you explain this because they don't understand. They're not paying for it because it's not mine. It's in Joe Bagadona's name. No, your job to explain this so they understand, okay? Now you know where to find these readings. When you look at page 57 on the bottom right, couple things around this gas meter. One is you're going to notice where a shutoff valve is. Okay, so that again is important. If you're smelling gas somehow, somewhere, you can always shut the main it's determined where this gas leak is happening. And you'll see the circular gray, and it's a vent, and it has little holes in it. Again, it's to allow air to escape from the gas line. Remember those little extension pipes on our systems, on our water heaters and our gas-fired hot air heating systems to allow the water. This is also to allow air to escape from the system, okay? And that's always going to be located where the meter is. If you look on page 58, you'll see how it shows the on and off position for gas shutoffs. It also gives an illustration for propane gas shutoffs. Oddly enough, I just settled on a property in February in the suburbs, new construction. They have gas, but not the gas we know that comes in from the street. Their gas was a propane tank buried underground. So a separate propane company comes and fills the tank with the gas that will then enter into the home. When you look on page 59, we're going to talk about heating oil and how this works. Couple things to keep in mind. Note on the outside of the property, there is what they indicate is a fill pipe, and then there is a vent pipe. The fill pipe is there so that when the oil company comes, they fill the tank that's within the house. If you're the buyer's agent and you're showing property that still in a neighborhood has a lot of oil tanks, West Philadelphia, North Philadelphia still has a lot of oil tank system. Couple things you need to keep in mind. The fill pipe, generally speaking, these are always in the front of the property, generally speaking. So you pull up to 123 Main Street and you get there before your buyer. And you're looking at the front of the property. This is very important. You need to observe, what am I looking at here? Me personally, who still work with buyers and sellers, take my buyers across the street and I say to them, let's look at this property. And what you're doing is you're stimulating their minds to then verbally explain to you what they're seeing. So I'm looking at the property and I note 2 vent pipes at the front basement. Immediately take your bright sheet, because you may be showing 5, 6, 7 properties. My lips to God's ear when this is all over. And you look and you go, wait a minute, this house doesn't have oil. This house has gas. Bells should be ringing off like you have tinnitus in your head. That's scary, and here's why. Once you get in the property and you confirm that this is a gas-heated system, Two things you have to note. A, was the oil tank removed? If it was not removed and they converted it to gas, there is a strong likelihood in an FHA-VA transaction, the appraiser will mandate that the tank be removed, just as an FYI. If you see that there is a tank in there that has not been removed, but it has been converted to gas, the next thing you do before you leave that property is to go to the front of the house and look and see if those vent pipes, the fill pipe and or the vent pipe, have been cannibalized and made dysfunctional. So what do I mean? Has it been filled with concrete? That answer you need to know even more especially is if you get in the basement, you saw the two pipes outside, but there's no oil tank. The oil tank was removed. Now here's Pandora's box. If that was not abandoned properly, the fill pipe, and it wasn't filled with concrete as it should have been, here's a visual. I want you to picture an oil truck lumbering up Pine Street. It stops in front of 123 Pine. The delivery man is on the phone, so his head's cocked and he's on the phone, and in his right hand, he's dragging the line over to 123 Pine Street. He's arguing with somebody on the phone. He puts the nozzle in and dumps 500 gallons of oil into 123 Pine Street. The problem is, that wasn't the address he was supposed to be at. He was to be at 123 Spruce Street. 500 gallons of oil just got dumped in somebody's basement. And if you don't think that happens, you're wrong. That happens on a regular basis every year to every oil company. Now, your buyers don't know nothing. Let's keep that in mind. You need to be looking and checking. You can't rely everything on your home inspector. First off, they're human, and not all of them are any good. So there are some things you need to keep abreast of. If this is the property that your buyer wants to buy, you already have a mental note about this. You see that there is no tank, but you don't know for sure this has been abandoned correctly. Remind the home inspector to investigate that at the home inspection. That'll be part of your reply to home inspection, that intake fill is abandoned correctly, so that when the oil guy with his head cocked like this on the phone arguing and goes to put that nozzle in, he can't get it in. It's obstructed. And he's like, what the heck? And then he stops talking to whoever and he realizes he's at the wrong address. You have prevented a huge, huge lawsuit and mess, okay? So things to keep in mind. The other thing you must keep in mind in this oil tank situation, we talked about it last week, if you are the listing agent for an old property that is vacant, and there is an oil system and an old boiler system, the boiler systems do not have safety, the old ones do not have safety valves on them that will shut off if the oil tank gets below a particular level of oil in the tank. New ones, once there's a quarter of a tank or an eighth of a tank of oil left, it'll shut itself off. It won't heat the house anymore because you need to have that tank filled. Old ones don't have that. If a tank runs dry, you will have destroyed the boiler system. You are responsible. You are the agent who took that listing. You need to find out about that. You need to find out immediately from the executor of the estate, who is the nephew of the little old lady who died, who lives in Wisconsin. Did Aunt Lucy have an automatic drop system? Who was her oil people? You got to figure out something, because that responsibility is going to fall on you. You're the one here. So always make sure that the oil that's going in tanks is on a system and an automatic drop, okay? Things to keep in mind. Let's move on to chapter 6. And we're going to talk about different types of foundations. You'll see on page 60 an artist rendering of foundational walls and sections, concrete block. So we all know what that looks like, right? Cinder block that's built on top of each other. You see that on the basement walls. Then there's poured concrete foundation. And that's when the property was built. There were frames built. And the frames were then filled with wet concrete. And then once they cured, the frames were removed and these walls of concrete were left. They're the foundation supporting the property. There's crawl space, which again is just a smaller amount of the block construction because we don't go as high. And then there is a slab, which is concrete, slab of concrete that is down as the foundation for the property. On page 61, it talks about pile foundation, pilings. This is used for poor soil conditions. Where might there be poor soil conditions? Does anybody know? Okay. Down the shore. Sand. Sand's not very supportive. It shifts and moves, right? So when you're down the shore, you see many properties raised up on pilings, those especially close to the bay and the ocean, that they are raised. That's what this is speaking of. The river ward may or may not have such things, again, because the soil around that large parcel of water could be shifting. Okay. Look on page 62. Basement concrete block, new construction is what they're showing here. Now, this is talking a lot about wet basements. We in Philadelphia have wet basements. We have wet basements for multiple reasons. One is we have a very high water table. We have a high water table because we are sandwiched between two large rivers, the Delaware and the Schuylkill. Also, we have Fairmount Park, largest park in the country, city park. Many rivers and streams, the Fairmount River, streams, creeks, all that runs is like a spider web off of all of this. We are wet. Now, in this illustration, it is showing you a sump pump and how the crock is there on the sump pump. Interior drain tiles. I live in the Northeast, 1/8 of a mile, I'm going to say 1/8 of a mile from Pennypack Park, Fairmount Park. A lot of water, right? So there was a number of issues with our home. The construction, even though it is a brick construction, was very poorly done when this developer built the house in 1962. If it's a nor'easter rain, now I've been in this house since 85, long time, right? When it would rain, the first thing I would do is run to the kitchen window. My kitchen is in the front of the house. And I would look at the street light and see if it was blowing from the east or from the west. If it was blowing from the east, I was going to be up all night with water in my laundry room and in my basement. Due to the fact that the driving rain and the poor masonry grading of brick and mortar would push through the brick wall. And literally, water would run down the inside of my brick wall, onto the poured concrete foundation, onto the floor. Let me tell you, it was a nightmare. Also, the basement floor on any given time could be damp, not wet. I didn't have any pools or puddles, but it was damp. After enough years of dealing with that, to which I couldn't stand it any longer, even though I had had the east side of my house repointed, Okay, so that's the mortar in between brick was replaced, which helped dramatically, but not completely. I hired a waterproofer. And on a Saturday, I had 6 men in the house, jackhammering, digging, carrying on, until I heard a scream like I had never heard before. I thought somebody lost an arm. I come flying down the steps, and I said, "Oh my God, what just happened?" And the waterproofer looked up at me and said, "I've been doing this business for 25 years. Never have I seen anything like this." He said, "We jackhammered your foundation, to put a trough in on the east side of the house. So as the water comes down, remember, you can never necessarily cure the problem. You can only, what's the word I'm here? I just went blank. I can't believe this. You can't cure it, but you can guide it. I can't stop the water pushing through the brick. But what was happening is they were building a trough on that side of the house, and the water would come down the wall, but instead of landing on the floor, would dump into the trough. The trough was then pitched on an angle that water would run into the crock of the sump pump. When the sump pump filled up, it would discharge into the utility sink. Okay. They also dug a lateral. That means from the east side of my house to the west side of my house, which I'm a twin, so my neighbor was on the west side of the house, to help relieve water from underground. What he found was when he jackhammered the middle of my basement floor to start this lateral canal to be then drained into the sump pump, he hit water. He said less than 8 inches under your foundation, you are over a creek. Who the hell knew? Hence why my concrete flooring was dampy, because the water under the ground, this is known as hydrostatic water pressure, the water under the ground was so great in pressure, it would force itself up through concrete. It's amazing what water can do. So we had to control the water. We weren't going to stop it, but we were going to control it by giving it a particular path to follow. It was the best money I have ever spent in my life. My neighbor, who too suffered from water issues, was greatly alleviated by the lateral system that was put in, because that was allowing water on her side of the house to laterally come across to my side that was on a pitch and dumping into the crock into the sump pump. Best money I ever spent. So on the lateral side of my house, water will still come down, but it's then guided into a corrugated area along the wall that drops into a large tipped trough with gravel and pitch. So then the water discharges into the crock, which then discharges into the sump pumping out into the utility sink. So I truly understand water without a doubt. And this illustration makes up some really good points here. It shows that there's a floor drain. If there's a floor drain, that floor drain too has to hook up somehow, either to a sump pump and or to a public system discharging out. If there is a sump pump, and this is showing as if it was in the burbs, it has to discharge out. Now I'm going to tell you, you want that discharging greater than 6 feet. Look at the illustration just below where it says measure for a proper grading. One of the easiest and least expensive, I don't want to say cures, but remedies to help you as a homeowner that suffers from wet basements is the grading outside of your property. Most properties are graded not enough, and or incorrectly. See here, for every foot away from the house, you'll note here, you can see that it's grading away from the house, right? So if you took a 2x4 and you put it up against your house and you made it level and went out 6 feet, there should be a 6-inch gap from your 2x4 to the ground. For every inch you move, it has to decline by 1 inch, an inch a foot. Improving the grading system outside of a home is huge. On this illustration on 62, see how the gutter is coming down and it shows a small 90-degree turn and then discharging? If the grading system is not as it should be, that water that's running off and dumping right next to the foundation of the property is just working its way back in. That gutter needs an extension, 6 feet or more away from the house. So as the gutters discharge, that water ends up far, far from the house. So it doesn't have the opportunity to seep through the soil and back in. See how that works? Makes sense there? Okay. Let's look on page 64. On page 64, they're going to talk about some different type of framework. They talk about balloon framing, platform framing. They talk about load-bearing walls. Now that's really important. We live in a time where everybody wants open concept. Everything's got to be open. Can't hide anything. No walls. Everything's got to be open. You're showing property to first-time home buyers, and they're like, you know, I love this block. This is really a great neighborhood. I can live with this house, but if I could just open some of these walls. Hey, they point to you. Can I take this wall out? I would certainly hope, for your sake and mine, that you're answering the question as this. I am not an engineer, architect. I would strongly recommend you hire an engineer or architect to determine if that wall is load-bearing or not. Even if it's load-bearing, there are things that can be done to remove a wall. It is way above your pay grade to ever comment on that question. You must defer that out. Look, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, I thought somebody said something. Then you'll see floor truss systems. They're showing you what a truss system looks like, which is very much a zigzag format. This is often used when there is a long span. Any of you who have gone to a home inspection and have a home inspector worth their salt, and I'm going to talk about my standard 3-bedroom, 1-bath, 2-story home in South Philly. That home inspector is going to take a ruler and he's going to measure the height of the joist, the width of the joist, and the length of the joist in the basement. This is all physics. The size of the joist will determine how much weight it can hold. 2 stories, 3 stories, okay? So it's really important that a good home inspector verify that this home was built with enough support system to avoid shifting and cracking, okay? It shows here on the bottom floor joist, and it shows wooden joist 2x8s, so it's saying 2 inches wide in thickness by 8-foot span, 10, 12, or 14. I will tell you, the older the home, so something more like 100 years old, where it says 2x8 is really 3x8. The systems were much larger and could hold much more weight than they were even built for. on occasions, and this actually happened to me many, many years ago, I got a come list on a house in Fishtown, and it was so strange. It was a single home in Fishtown off of Burke's, just in the middle of the block. It made no sense, like something you've ever seen before. And it was vacant. It was an estate. I went in there, and those of you who know me know I wear high heels. And anyone who wears high heels, any women here, will know you're very sensitive because it's a balancing act. And you're very sensitive in differentials of the flooring. And as I walked into the living room, I noticed a decline. I was declining as I got to the dining room. And this was a very old property. As I got to the dining room kitchen area, there was the circular staircase to go in the basement. I go down the basement, and what do I find? I find jacks strategically placed all throughout the basements, holding up the house. I was like, what am I looking at here? When the home was built by someone other than a professional, going back probably close to 150 years ago, it was done with joists that were too long of a span and not thick enough. The quality of the lumber lacked. And because it lacked, it was folding in itself. To prevent it from caving in, metal jacks were put on the floor of the concrete floor of the basement and then jacked up, so they're 8 feet tall, to support these joists that were wanting to cave in because it was too much weight holding on them. They weren't strong enough. And that's what this basement was being held up by, even though I could still feel the decline as I walked. Okay? So when you feel something, when you're walking, pay attention to it. It's telling you something is not right. So you need to investigate. It also shows you what an eye joist is. It's a manufacturer joist done with laminated cores of plywood. It's another type of joist system. Beams and types on page 65 gives a great illustration of different types of beams and joists. There are laminated vertical. There are laminated factory glued. There is solid wood timber. There is what is known as an I-beam. That's made out of metal, but it's very similar to the I-joist you saw on the previous page. And then there's this type of buildup, which, to be honest, I'm not familiar with.
Hey,
Okay?
Vicki,
Yeah.
if you are walking through a house and like when kids are running through houses and like the floor
Vibrates.
moves, yeah. But is that indicative of an issue as well?
It very well could be. That's where two things happen. If your buyer is moving forward, you need to remind this home inspector, listen, I want you to check this. And you stand in the middle of the living room and you bounce up and down. And if he looks at you and you go, you felt that too, that's going to put a bug in his head. He's going to now go right down the basement and he's going to look at these joists. And he's going to make a determination of one of a few things. Either he is of quality to say, yep, we have a deficiency. B, we have a deficiency that is correctable. Or C, he's going to say, you need an engineer in here. Do not be afraid to ask questions to these home inspectors. Okay? You've been in that house maybe twice. This is his first time through. And he's doing half a dozen things at one time. Do not hesitate to bring something to that home inspector's attention. And it may be nothing. He say, oh, no, this is fine. yeah, it happens, but it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Or he's going to say, you know what? That's a concern. I'm going to make sure I make a notation about that. I don't like that. So
Awesome. Thank you.
you're welcome, honey. All right. Let's look on page 66. And on 66, we're going to talk about some very basic framing, known as 2x4 framing. You know, I heard a commercial years ago that has always stuck with me. And the commercial was about replacing your windows. And the commercial said, keep in mind, windows and doors are nothing but holes in your house. And I thought for a second. I said, oh my God, that's really a true statement. They are holes that we try to plug up. So we plug it up with a door or we plug it up with a window. But that's right, there's a hole. Now, I want you to look at something. Look here on the top photo and see where it says header above both the window and the door. That's the additional support system, because now you've created a deficiency. We have a hole. Now we have a deficiency. But to support that deficiency, we now have this heavy-duty wood or metal above the hole to support what's above it. That's really important to understand so that you at least know the terminology, what a header is. It's what's above that doorway, interior, exterior, okay? It's important to understand that. Look on page 67. Another word that is used, especially in a brick home for the exterior, is known as a lintel. That will be made out of metal, and that is above the hole, the window. But note how it expands beyond the hole. It expands beyond the hole because it is there as an aid to support the brick above it. We have to offset the hole, and this is how we do this with headers and with lintels. Sometimes in brick and stone construction, you'll see a rusty something above the window. That's your lintel that has rusted, needs to be scraped and repainted. That's the lintel that originally was added into the home when it was built to support the bricking above it, okay? Stucco. Stucco is an absolute nightmare. You'll note on the illustration here, stucco is traditional cement in 3 coats, and it shows you how this is supposed to be done with metal flashing, perforated beading, paper and wire mesh, and then 3 coats of stucco. Here's why we have so many lawsuits with stucco, is for a number of reasons. One is, if this is hand-constructed stucco, it is rarely done as indicated here. It's often done in 2 coats, not 3 coats. Maybe they didn't put the paper and or mesh wiring. Maybe there isn't that perforated casing bead. It's sloppy workmanship. Problem B, if water gets behind stucco, it becomes stagnant and it molds up. And the mold spores could be made accessible to the air within the home. If you are the buyer agent for a buyer who's buying a home that has a stucco finish to it, you must insist they get a stucco inspection. That is separate from that of a home inspector. You need a stucco specialist who is going to drill very small holes around these holes, these windows and doors, because that is the greatest access point of moisture to penetrate into the stucco area, of which they will put a moisture meter in the hole and determine if there is moisture within that area. Repairing, replacing, and remedying of deficiencies of stucco are tens of thousands of dollars. This is no joke. And I have on my desk in any given year a handful of stucco litigation. It's not pretty. So stand firm and make sure your buyers understand the purpose of having stucco done. It is huge, huge. It goes on to talk about on page 68, different type of windows and doors. It goes on page 69 to explain a double hung window. Now, we talked about that in the very beginning of last week when we spoke about lead paint in windows. And you'll see how the bottom sash can slide up. The lower slash can be pushed up, and the upper slash can be pushed down. Where the two meet causes friction in the movement of a lower slash sash going up and an upper sash coming down. Lead is heavier than air, so therefore the lead dust is going to work its way down, hit the ground. Baby Mary Jane, who's just over a year old, is going to come along, get lead dust on her hands, and babies put their hands in their mouth. So that is one of the most common forms of lead in gestation, is through the dust. And what we spoke about last week was to make sure, if you are selling one of these gorgeous homes in Mount Airy, in any areas out there in Western North Philly, beautiful, beautiful homes, but all have wood windows, make sure your buyer is aware and cautioned on the possibility of lead dust. Okay, now that's not a material defect. Can't ask the seller to replace all my windows. I went vinyl, double hung, double pane, and you need to replace it. No, it doesn't work that way. But your buyer has to be made aware that this could be a problem if there is small children. On page 70, it talks about garage door openers, and it talks about the reversing with the light that comes across the beam from one end of the garage door to the other, that when that beam is broken, a ball, an animal, a child, something's running real fast through the door. As the door's coming down, they're sneaking through. That beam is broken, it will cause the door to retract back up. Any good home inspector, let me say that, will be checking that to make sure the I-beam is working correctly. On page 72, we're talking about insulation and ventilation. Homes have to breathe. I say this over and over. A home is a living creature, and homes have to breathe. They have to ventilate. So there is caution when someone wants to insulate their home from both the heat coming in and the cold going out. That's wonderful. And insulation is very important, but it has limitations. Even though the home is insulated, the home still has to breathe. If you've been at a home inspection and you see the home inspector take a ladder and push up the crawl space, you know, that we typically find in one of the closets of the bedroom of the 3-bedroom, 2-story, 1-bath South Philly home. And he takes a flashlight and he's looking up there. He's looking at a couple things. He's looking for discoloration up on the plywood that he can see the underneath on, especially on a shingle roof. Especially on a shingle roof. On an A-frame shingle roof, there are nails, because they nail it in, right? What the home inspector is looking at those nails, and he's looking at the color around the nail. Does he see dark gray or black discoloration around that? If he does, that's an indication that that attic venting is not sufficient. Therefore, there is moisture buildup around the nails. When you look on page 73, you'll see where it says ventilation, two basic types. And it talks about a ridge vent. A ridge vent you will often see. And once you start looking, you're going to go, oh, that's what that is. You find yourself in the burbs in a development, and they've all got A-frame roofs. And you look at the very top, and you'll see something on top of that. It's like metal that runs across the very peak of the roof. It is a venting system that allows air to come up and through and out the roof. Remember, heat rises. So the ridge vent allows the air within the crawl space or attic to escape, where the ventings that were underneath the gutter area has vents to allow air to go into the house. So air goes in the house and out the house. Very similar to our hot air heating system. Remember, the return side on a closed system, all that air has to get back into the unit itself. Same thing, air has to come into the attic and has to expel through the attic. So venting, different types of ventings are important in attics. It shows maybe a bathroom vent. Another common thing you'll find on home inspection reports, many of these homes are one bath conversions. And so we've got to figure out where we're putting a powder room. And we decided we're going to put a powder room off the kitchen, but it has no window. They also didn't vent it. That's not right. There needs to be a venting system that goes outside. Some of them will put it up into the attic. It's not deemed correct to do that because now you're putting moisture back up into the attic. Even though you're saying, yeah, but it's a half bath, there's still moisture, right? Okay. Look at the different types of roofs on page 75 and the different grading and slopes of roofs. So here in the city, on the right-hand side on the bottom, it talks about roof slopes, roof materials. On the very bottom, see where there's up to a 2.5-inch grading, also known as a flat roof, which is a membrane roof. Now we do rubber roofs, or bitumen is another name for a membrane roof that's made out of rubber. That's why flat roofs leak so frequently without frequent maintenance and having it checked. Because the pitch is so slight. You don't want the water pooling. And you'll see that from the photography or photos of a home inspector. If he's been up on the roof after it rains, he'll note there is pooling, an unevenness of the roof, and that's never good. Look at some of the verbiage on 75 on the left. When they talk about the ridge, they show the ridge vent. That angled between the dormer roof and the main roof is called a valley. Step flashing is what runs along that little extension of the dormer. There's chimney flashing. You hear a lot about that in home inspections. Roof vent, what a gable is, what are eaves. This helps when you're reading the home inspection report, or the home inspector comes off the roof and is speaking of things. You're going to understand where it is he's speaking of. Look and see here, it shows that plumbing vent we talked about earlier, right? There's a collar that's supposed to be on that. Lazy builders don't put collars on it. And you'll hear about that in a home inspection. Important. Talks about different types of shingle roofs on page 76, all the way to the wood roof. Wood shake shingle roofs, that does still exist. Many, many years ago, there was a deed restriction that had been added 100 years ago or so to a huge parcel that was sold for new construction. And the deed restriction stated that any building that was built on that parcel had to have cedar shake roofing. That was the only way they could build those homes. They had to have that kind of roofing. Not something you're going to see in the city, but they do exist. You may see some asphalt shingle roofing. That's common, right? And it describes how that's done. Bitumen membrane, felt underlaying, decking material, metal drip edges, the start strip, and the shingles that overhang by 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. You would hope you would have somebody with knowledge, correct knowledge, how to do this. It also talks about tile roofs. There's a neighborhood just outside of the city called Hollywood. It's in Montgomery County, just as you leave the city, Rockledge, and then Hollywood. This small community, Hollywood, almost every home in it is sort of a Pueblo, am I saying that correctly, style home of masonry. Looks like something you would see in Arizona. All of their roofs are these Spanish-looking tile roofs. So these things you are going to run across on occasion, not frequently, but on occasion. Chimneys. Chimneys are huge. I talked about this last week. You can grade a home inspector by certain particular things. And one for me is, how does he approach the chimney? The chimney is the way of carbon monoxide leaving the home. And if the chimney is defected because the lining of the chimney has deteriorated, we've got big problems because it's blocking the carbon monoxide to leave the home. And it shows here some designs of chimneys, words we need to know about chimneys. Where it says the solid concrete cap on the right of page 78, capping it's called. Many times these are in poor conditions, which allow water to get into and behind the concrete and the brick itself, which then freeze and force the brick to be shifted and moved. This one that I'm speaking about, the illustration on 78, shows a clay flue liner. And we talked about when the liner flue has deteriorated, especially the terracotta, which is made out of clay, and instead of it being like a vertical soldier, has cracked and tipped, which is now deflecting the airflow, if not completely blocking airflow, as the carbon monoxide leaves the house. Chimney is very important. Make sure that home inspector you're using has good knowledge and does a good examination of the chimney, and very well may refer to a chimney specialist to come out and evaluate it. Okay? That is a wrap up for today. I hope this has been helpful. Again, you are not an engineer, architect, home inspector, but you need to understand the basics because we have a living creature here, how this living creature works. And if you have any questions, something doesn't sit right with you, do not hesitate to talk to the home inspector about it. Any questions? All right, well, talk to you guys soon. Be safe. Bye.
Thanks, Vicki.